Hi everyone. So today we will examine Alexander's legacy. A legacy is the impact that you leave on the world once you're gone. So we know that Alexander died of a mosquito bite in the ancient city of Babylon in Mesopotamia. We know that he was just 33 years old, and when he died, he had conquered the largest empire in history up to that point, and I believe overall second largest empire when comparing all of them throughout time. So today, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to evaluate that legacy of Alexander and determine which aspect of the world he left behind, the empire he left behind, was strongest and most impactful on the people that it affected. Okay, so after Alexander's death, like I said, it was the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. In fact, Persia was the largest empire before this, and he conquered that empire, he absorbed it, and then added much more to it. Okay? So during his time, if you remember, Philip II, his dad, and then Alexander himself and the Macedonians really admired Greek culture, Greek history, what the Greeks had done. So during his time conquering, in trying to set up his rule, he purposefully spread Greek culture throughout the lands that he did conquer. And it's interesting, because he didn't tell them they had to adopt these cultures, but he encouraged them to, and at the same time encouraged them to maintain a little bit of their own identity as well, the cultures that they had already. And if you remember through Cyrus the Great and later on Darius of Persia, a ruler that allows you to continue to keep your cultures and traditions and customs, you're much less likely to have people revolt against you. Okay? So as he spread this Greek culture, part of that was building cities. And he had these cities built that were designed to look like Greek cities. Not even Macedonian cities, but Greek cities. And over 70 of them were built and named after Alexander himself. The most famous that we'll get to being Alexandria, Egypt. Okay? He did name one after his horse Bucephalus as well. So he also encouraged Greek settlers to settle in these cities. He didn't just want to build Greek cities and let Persians live in these cities and let Syrians live in a Greek-looking city. What's the point of that? He encouraged thousands and thousands of Greek settlers, people from Greece, to go to these cities, to settle down, to start a life, to have a family, and to spread their culture specifically. Other than their language, it was art, literature, science, all these things that the Athenians really are studying and that they're achieving. And so this empire, at his death, looks like this. Okay? He spent about 12 years conquering Macedonia, Greece. Over here is, Mesopotamia, Syria, Asia Minor, the Kingdom of Egypt, and then what would be Persia up to here, the capital of Persia. And then, of course, he stretched all the way up here into ancient India, the farthest any Europeans had gone up to that point that we have evidence of. Massive. And we're talking millions of square miles of territory that he conquered. And he really just didn't have an opportunity to rule that empire because he died so young and so suddenly. So the big thing here, a big key to today's lesson, is tolerance. Tolerance, as a vocabulary word, is the ability to allow other opinions or cultures to exist, even if you don't agree with them. The good example I always say is like, you have a friend, he likes a different sports team, you guys tolerate each other because you're still friends and it's not like the end of the world. But he acts differently sometimes. They like some other things than you. You don't have everything in common. You tolerate each other. And so tolerance is, again, that ability to allow other things other than what you believe in to exist. Oftentimes it's opinions and cultures. So although, interestingly, Alexander encouraged the spread of this Greek culture throughout the massive empire that he conquered, he did have tolerance for all the other cultures and encourage them to keep their traditions and culture as well. So really, he didn't want these people to adopt Greek culture and throw away what they've known for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. He didn't want them to fully embrace Greek culture. He wanted a real blending of this Greek Macedonian hybrid culture with the customs that already existed. He really was a globalized person, and that word means, it wasn't just like Macedonian and Greek, we conquered everything and now you listen to us. He really wanted this combination, this globalized world where ancient India, all the way over here, had cities being built in it that looked like Greek cities over here on a different continent. He didn't just want it to look like that. He wanted there to be a blend of what was important to the people here in India, in Persia, in Mesopotamia, in Syria, in Egypt. He wanted all these groups to share and blend things. He didn't want it to be one way or the highway. And what it did is it created this new culture that we call Hellenistic. Hellenic comes from Greek, okay, the Hellenic culture. So it's Greek-like culture that was created and that was heavily influenced by these Greek ideas. And that's why Hellen is there, the Hellenic aspect of Greek. It's Greek-like. It's a blend with the dominant ideas of Greece and customs of the Greeks, including their language, what they studied, ways that they lived, cities that looked like they belonged in ancient Greece, but were blended. Hellenistic is not where it replaced these cultures in these faraway areas. It was a blending of what was already there with Greek-like culture that was heavily influenced by these Greek ideas, but still left room for Persian, Egyptian, Syrian, and Indian ideas as well. Okay, so really a true melting pot. We call it a melting pot when people are, the United States is called a melting pot. There's people, there are hundreds of millions of people in this country, 300 million plus people in this country. We come from all over, and American culture and society is a blend of so many other places and people, and that's called a melting pot. It's like you take all these different ingredients and put them in this big pot and you melt them down and it becomes this new thing, okay? An entirely new ingredient. So Hellenistic culture, again, is this blend of the Greek, which also means the Macedonian, Persian, Egyptian, Syrian, and a little bit of these Indian cultures as well. All of these groups. Doesn't just mean it was Greek and Persian mixed in that area. If it was a Persian area, it was Greek, Persian, and these other groups as well. He wanted people to intermingle in this new empire of his. But he didn't just want it to be learning from one another. He went even further. He himself married a princess in every one of these kingdoms that he conquered. And this was really symbolic. It was a really tight bond, like a permanent bond, that he was not here to be a conqueror and change your culture and change your way of life that it's always been. He was showing that he was accepting of these cultures. He was accepting because he was blending it with his own culture and with his own life. And, a marriage is a great way to make a permanent bond between groups. And then he took it a step further and he encouraged his men, his soldiers, to marry women from these different areas as well that he conquered, to truly blend this new Hellenistic culture. It's like a blend of learning, of adopting things from each other, of exchanging ideas and traditions, but also a literal blend of DNA. These people are going to marry, they're going to have kids, and now they're not just a Persian or a Syrian or an Egyptian, but they were a Macedonian and a Greek as well as these other places. It really was a melting pot, a purposeful way to not just say, hey, I really encourage you to learn from and blend these cultures. He was also saying, look, I'm going to lead by example and marry someone from these kingdoms. And I'm going to encourage you, my soldiers, to do the same thing for a real serious permanent blend of these cultures. It did change the world, guys. It did change the world. So his legacy is that he left this culture behind that he imagined what he could have achieved if he had left so much more or had so much more time to actually be able to rule this new empire that he, newly conquered and put together. However, his legacy goes even further than that, because this empire was just too large for one man to rule. Who knows if it would have been okay for Alexander to even rule himself. Most people look to him like a god, a living god figure for what he was able to do. I believe he was, in the histories also say that he was undefeated. Not invincible, but undefeated. He never lost a battle. And that's evidenced by, the Egyptians didn't even fight him. They just gave up. They surrendered. So this massive empire, he was only 33 years old. He didn't have an heir that was old enough to take over. So it was divided into 3 different Hellenistic kingdoms. Okay, this Hellenistic culture. They were the Hellenistic kingdoms after Alexander. And they were all supposed to work together and not fight each other, but they were taken over by his generals, his 3 top generals. And so it combined these different regions. The first, I'll go back to the map. The first was the kingdom of Macedonia and Greece. This area here, right here, was his first kingdom. Okay? It was the weakest government of the 3 Hellenistic kingdoms, and that was because of the many revolts from the Greeks. And also, don't forget, the Greeks have this nasty streak of democracy in them, and they don't like to listen to others. They might have been conquered by, Philip II. They might have been reconquered and reminded when Alexander burned down Thebes and enslaved those people. But once that was gone, they just went right back to revolting. And there's also the threat from Rome. If you look at the map, over here is the city of Rome, the ancient city of Rome, the peninsula of Italy today. Rome was a burgeoning and an expanding world regional power. So when this was happening, okay, there was a lot of trade going on with the Romans, but they, as Alexander as he died in these 3 Hellenistic kingdoms, the empire was divided into those kingdoms. You have a growing power in the region of Rome. And so eventually all of these groups, all of these Hellenistic kingdoms will be conquered by the Romans. Okay, so there was the threat of Rome here as well. So Macedonia and Greece, it was really difficult to rule it as a kingdom. It was the smallest of the kingdoms. And I'll show you the map right there. It was the smallest of the kingdoms, but really hard to control simply because of the threat from Rome over here, but also because of the revolts from the Greeks. They're continuously revolting. Next was the kingdom of Syria. This actually included most of the former Persian Empire, and it was just too large. You'll see this, all the pink right here. It's enormous. Okay, it even extended over here into India. Just too much territory and too many different cultures that were blending, and that too many different groups of people. It ended up being that there were lots of revolts, a lot of the same way that this kingdom of Macedonia and Greece fell apart. And again, Rome will also conquer this area in centuries later. Then there was the kingdom of Egypt, the wealthiest of these kingdoms right down here. Okay, the wealthiest of these kingdoms. The great city of Alexandria was built there. Okay, Alexandria, you can see right here. And obviously built and designed as a Greek city, named after Alexander the Great, and the library of Alexandria that did later burn down. What a horrible thing for human history to lose all of those thousands and thousands of ancient texts that were amassed throughout the ancient world. This entire empire, all of these things, these scrolls, these books, this information was here. Much that we lost. But although it was the wealthiest of the kingdoms, because it was ancient Egypt, it also was going to be conquered by the Romans within a few centuries. So as you can see, most of this territory here is going to be conquered by Rome, and that's our next topic where we're going after February vacation. Okay. Last thing I'll say here is it was called the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt because there was a Ptolemy was the family line, the heirs that took over this kingdom, this area. So again, tolerance is one of the largest legacies of Alexander, aside from this large empire that was divided into these Hellenistic kingdoms, these 3 kingdoms. Tolerance created this Hellenistic culture. It's Greek-like. Okay? It's heavily influenced by Greek ideas, but it's blended with these other traditions. It did not replace them.